All right, welcome back. Today, we are getting into one of the big ones. I mean, maybe the biggest question humanity has ever asked. Seriously, it's something philosophers, scientists, you name it, have been wrestling with for, well, forever. So let's just dive right in.
So, here it is, the question. Why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, just think about it for a second. Look around. There's stuff, the world, the stars, you, me. It all exists. But why? Why isn't there just emptiness, an absolute void? You know, this huge, fundamental mystery is exactly where a really famous line of reasoning kicks off, and it's called the cosmological argument.
I mean, for as long as people have been looking up at the sky, we've been trying to figure it all out, right? We've been looking for an explanation. And what's interesting about the cosmological argument is that it's not really about blind faith. It's an attempt to build a solid, logical, rational bridge, starting from the world we can all see and touch, and trying to reason our way to some kind of ultimate cause for it all.
So how does this argument actually work? Well, to understand it, we've got to go back in time to one of its most famous champions, the medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas. He looked at this massive question of existence and came up with this really powerful, really logical solution that all centers on one big idea, a first cause.
Okay, so what was his starting point? Well, his argument is what philosophers call a posteriori. Now, I know that sounds like a fancy technical term, but all it really means is that it starts with experience. It doesn't begin with some abstract idea in your head. Nope. It begins with something you and I see every single day. Things cause other things to happen. Simple as that.
But Aquinas makes a really, really important distinction here. See, he wasn't just talking about a temporal cause, like one domino knocking over the next and a line that happened way in the past. He was way more interested in what he called sustaining causes. These are the things that are keeping reality going right here, right now. Think about gravity. It's not something that happened once and then stopped. It's a constant force holding the moon in orbit this very second. If gravity just switched off, the orbit would be gone. That's a sustaining cause.
And that, right there, is the heart of what Aquinas was getting at. For him, this first cause isn't like some cosmic starter pistol that went off at the Big Bang and then was done. Not at all. It's the foundational reality that is continuously holding the entire show together, moment by moment by moment by moment.
Okay, so let's walk through the logic step by step. First, we see cause and effect all around us. Pretty straightforward. Second, nothing can just pop itself into existence. It needs a cause. Okay, so far so good. But here's the kicker. Aquinas says this chain of causes can't go back forever. Why not? Well, think about it. If every cause depends on the one before it, and that goes on infinitely, then the whole chain is just floating. It has no foundation, nothing to hold it up. It makes no sense. Therefore, and this is the big leap, there has to be a first cause, something that wasn't caused by anything else, an uncaused cause that gets the whole thing started and keeps it going. And this, Aquinas says, is what people mean when they say God.
Here's a great way to picture it. Imagine a chain just hanging in the air, not attached to anything. That's impossible, right? It's got to be fixed to something solid, like a hook on the ceiling. Well, for Aquinas, the universe is that chain of cause and effect, and it absolutely has to be anchored to something ultimate, an unmoved mover, or an uncaused cause, something that holds everything up without needing to be held up itself.
Now you have to admit, it's a pretty elegant and powerful argument. It feels logical. But is it really airtight? Well, fast forward a few centuries to the Enlightenment, and a whole new wave of thinkers started to come along and, well, poke some serious holes in it. They started questioning the most fundamental assumptions the whole thing was built on.
And leading the charge was the philosopher David Hume, who was, without a doubt, one of the greatest skeptics of all time. Hume was just not buying it. He looked at the conclusion, this idea of a necessary being, something that has to exist, and basically said, those words don't even make sense together.
So to take this argument apart, Hume used this brilliant logical tool that we now call Hume's fork. He basically said that any true statement you can make falls into one of two buckets. On one side, you have relations of ideas. These are things that are true by definition, like a triangle has three sides. You can't even imagine a three-sided shape that's not a triangle. Its opposite is a flat-out contradiction. Then, in the other bucket, you have matters of fact. These are things we know from experience, like the sun will rise tomorrow. Now here's the crucial difference. You can imagine the sun not rising tomorrow. It's unlikely, for sure, but it's not a logical impossibility.
Okay, So Hume takes his fork and applies it directly to that core premise, that everything must have a cause. He says, hang on a second, is that a relation of ideas? Well, no. We can totally imagine something just popping into existence without a cause. It's weird, but it's not a logical contradiction, like a four-sided triangle. So it must be a matter of fact, right? Something we learned from observing the world. And this is where Hume makes his big move. He says, sure, but all of our experience, every single observation we've ever made, has been inside the universe. We have absolutely no justification for taking a rule that works in here and applying it to the universe as a whole. It's a cosmic leap of faith.
And this idea, the thought that maybe the universe itself is special, a unique case that doesn't have to play by the same rules as everything inside of it, well, that idea was picked up and carried forward into the 20th century by another philosophical heavyweight.
I'm talking about the philosopher Bertrand Russell, and he came up with this just killer analogy. It's so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. He said, look, every single human being has a mother. That's true. But does that mean the entire human race as a whole has a mother? Of course not. The question itself is just nonsense. You're taking a rule that applies to the parts, the individual people, and wrongly applying it to the whole.
And this kind of mistake actually has a name. It's called the fallacy of composition. And Russell's big claim was that the cosmological argument is guilty of this exact logical error. It sees that things inside the universe all have causes, and then it makes this huge, unjustified leap to say that the universe itself, the whole shebang, must also have a cause.
So, if the argument is flawed, what's the alternative? Well, Russell proposed something pretty stark. He said, maybe the universe is just a brute fact. Maybe the buck stops here. The search for an explanation, for a cause, it just ends with the universe itself. Perhaps it doesn't have a deeper reason. It's just there, and that's all.
So what we're left with is this epic intellectual stalemate, right? It's like a clash of the titans. In one corner, you have this powerful, logical argument demanding that there must be a foundational cause for everything. And in the other corner, you have this sharp, skeptical critique that says, hold on, maybe you're not even allowed to ask that question.
And this table here really lays it all out, doesn't it? The argument starts with the premise, everything we see has a cause, and uses logic to get to an uncaused first cause. The critique comes right back and says, whoa, not so fast. Your premise is just an assumption, and your logic is a fallacy. What you have are two completely different and totally incompatible ways of looking at reality.
And this debate isn't just for philosophers anymore. Today, modern physics has jumped right into the middle of it. We've got theories about the Big Bang, and even wild ideas from quantum mechanics about particles literally popping into existence from a vacuum, suggesting a universe could maybe come from nothing. Of course, what physicists mean by nothing is a whole other can of worms that people are still arguing about.
So that leaves us right back where we started, with this huge, lingering question. When we ask, why is there something rather than nothing, are we tapping into a deep truth about the nature of reality? Or are we just asking a question that sounds good but is ultimately meaningless? Are our human brains just trying to apply a familiar rule to a place where that rule simply doesn't apply? That right there is the unresolved mystery at the heart of this whole debate.